I'd like to welcome my colleague, Allison CARLSON, who is going to key up a conversation right now about sustainable competitiveness. Please do join us.
Thank you for joining us tonight. We know your schedules are busy, and thank you for carving out a few moments for us. That was an incredible conversation and kickoff to our first Her Power here at Davos. And now we're going to take a little bit of a thematic pivot, but nonetheless talking about a very important aspect of leadership. And as Andrew was mentioning, about sustainability and business outcomes. This session is entitled, When Purpose Meets Performance. And I'm here with Sophia Mendelson, Chief Sustainability and Commercial Officer at SAP, and TWOMEY-MADSEN, Senior Vice President, Sustainability and Communications at Pandora. I'm really excited to dive into this conversation. You know, over the last decade or so, there's been a lot of undulation when we talk about ESG and performance metrics and sustainability and the contribution to business, and whether or not it's a cost or whether or not it's actually driving business outcomes. And there are some circles that are suggesting there's sort of a retrenchment and a belief that it is a cost and it's not driving business outcomes. I think you two think very differently about that. And against the backdrop of the World Economic Forum, I really want to pick that apart and understand from both of your perspectives as leaders in this sector, how are you seeing outcomes from investments in sustainability throughout the supply chain? Sophia, I'm turning to you first.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. And what you started just gets me so fired up, because the first thing I have to say is that it's not about cost. Business embraces cost all the time. Business invests billions. Bezos gets on investor calls and says, we're trying to make $100 million mistakes. What this is about is what sustainability requires us to look in the face of, what it requires us to openly discuss. And that's why this prevailing narrative this year that the Davos man has turned his back on climate change or social topics that you also work on and we care about is both false and misleading, right? It's false because it got on the agenda in the first place because there was a business opportunity, which I know you can speak beautifully to. And it's misleading because it ignores the data and the facts. And if there is one thing business leaders are always meant to do, it's meant to be to look at the data. And you can look at WEF's own data. Every year, WEF releases their risk report. Did you guys see it, right? This year, short-term risk, long-term risk, same as always, very smart, bifurcate. Okay, short-term risk, climate change, still in the top 5, shifting from number 2 to number 4 as if this is disappearing off the agenda, right? And in the long-term category, sustainability, climate change, and environmental issues, again, dominating the top 5 WEF long-term risks as it has year after year, which I think gives business plenty to talk about.
Great way to set the stage. Thank you for that. Mads, over to you. You know, Pandora is among the most sustainable companies in the world. And you have made, and the company has made, a concerted effort to transition and shift business operations towards circularity for greater resilience and impact. And it's making you rather competitive as well. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. How are you seeing leaning into and investments in sustainability and resilience actually strengthening your position in what is undoubtedly a very dynamic and volatile world?
No, I agree, and I totally agree with what you're saying, right? So it's not cost, it's investments. But actually, before you got to that, you could say some of this is just stuff you have to do, right? If you believe in science, you got to do it no matter whether it's cost or an investment or whatever. And that's kind of the team that we're on. So making that decoupling of emissions and growth is kind of like, you got to do it. That said, the good news is it can be brilliant business if you kind of apply a long-term perspective to it. So we look at big transformations we've done that it's true. If you look at that with a very short-term perspective, it costs us money. And are they coming in tomorrow? No, maybe not. But then the year after or the year after, suddenly you begin to see in real hardcore data an effect on the visibility of the company that can translate into advertising spend, if you will. You see an effect on attrition or engagement of employees, and that can translate really quickly into productivity gains or savings on attraction. So there's real hardcore data that makes this a super business, basically. And I think that's the biggest mistake we kind of got ourselves into, that these two things are opposite and that they can't go together. It's just doesn't belong in today's world, really. Yeah.
If I can pick up on that quickly, how in your operations, in Pandora's operations, are you making that shift? You're making rather marked and significant transitions into recycling, for example, and in your business, that's considerable. And I imagine this week at Davos, there are going to be a number of conversations about mining and metals, and I'm curious how you're thinking about that and how actually leaning into that recycling element and more sustainable materials is strengthening your business and reducing geopolitical risk as well.
Yeah. So so for many reasons we saw that our main reliance, our main footprint, our main impact are the main raw materials we're using. They're related to mining. So silver is our main raw material, one of the biggest silver purchases of the world. Gold as well, we use quite a lot of, and other metals. And so looking at a climate mitigation perspective, shifting these volumes to recycled sources brings down our footprint in Scope 3 significantly. So if we could do just one thing to ease our impact on the planet, that would be it. So we decided 5 years ago to conduct such a transformation. And so looking at that is kind of, that's where sustainability becomes quite a long-term and a systemic change. We couldn't just call a supplier and say, hey, please ship this tomorrow, because it didn't exist. There wasn't, verified supply chains in place for that. Also, we couldn't get a company to just run with this. So what we've done is we've embedded it in the incentives programs, in the corporate financing of the company. So this sits, the targets for circularity is tied into the entire financing. We have credit lines, corporate bonds, what have you. It's tied to incentives programs. And so you get kind of a company mobilized around a cause like this. Then you can gain momentum, and then you can actually move quite fast. So that's kind of the transition we've been through, and now the consumer in a way doesn't have a choice. Everything we put on the shelf is recycled silver and gold, because it has never been a consumer play. It's been a play for other reasons so far to generate this value. Yeah.
Great. Sophie, I'd like to turn back to you. SAP is working with a number of companies and organizations to really embed sustainability into their practices, their operations. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that. I think you both did a great job at the outset of the conversation, really explaining why this is important. And it does lead to outcomes, but how? How do you operationalize that? And how can you work with organizations to really pinpoint where they can have greater efficiencies in their operations to reduce costs and also improve performance? Yeah.
I will make sure I get really specific so we believe me, and I'll talk about boring things like auto parts, because I feel like when you apply it to that, it's like, yeah, you're really in the supply chain, right? But first, there was a piece of wisdom embedded in what you said that I think is so important to impart on the influencers of Davos, which is the supply chain doesn't exist to achieve our dreams. It must be created, and it must be created through companies generating demand. And then it must be supported by consumers valuing it. So we have to counter the narrative here this week that the supply chain cannot be created, because it can, and I can tell, and will tell many other examples. And we have to counter the narrative that consumers won't absorb it, because there is a mountain of data, industry by industry, that pushes that away. So it's on us to bring those two pieces of the value chain together. And just to contrast the beautiful world of Pandora, I'll take us to the practical world of car door installation made of foam, right? So this is very important. You want your car door to be insulated. It keeps you safe. It keeps you comfortable. And of course, many of the car manufacturers we might know off the top of our head, they don't produce that themselves. And so we work with one company in Turkey, Martor Foam Pack, who figured out that they could model different types of materials in this foam, in this car door, including through the use of AI, and market them differently to their supply chain and to their consumer, showing how you can drop emissions by up to 80% by doing so. And then they named the different materials after different melting glaciers.
Beautiful.
That is marketing. And it's wonderful to hear those concrete examples, right? And really being able to grab onto what we mean by this, and not only the impacts, but the how. How do you do it, and how do you bring others along? I think that's absolutely part of leadership in this space. And I'd like to expand the conversation a little bit from sustainability to also the social aspect of ESG and governance, and the need to be, inclusive in that leadership. And Mads, I'd like to turn to you. And when you're thinking about bringing on and recruiting leaders to really drive this transformation forward, and also thinking about women in leadership, how are you thinking about that? And how are you really making sure that you're committing to the targets that Pandora has set?
So it's in a way, it's much the same way, right? So it kind of starts out with us setting an ambition level. So if it was CO2, we say 50% down by 2030. That's the target. And what's the program needed to get us there? What are the investments needed to get us there? And embed all of that into the way we incentivize top management. Because if you don't, it's always a nice to have and not a thing that you have to prioritize. We go about it the same way when it comes to diversity inclusion. So we set out to become gender parity, have a gender parity in our top leadership, so the top 100 executive management, board of directors. By 2030, the latest, we'll get there much earlier, quite soon actually. And we put that into milestones. We put it into the programs that incentivize top management. So we break it down just like each executive member has a CO2 roadmap. They have a roadmap for getting to where we want, and that way it becomes, actionable programs, just like anything else we do in the company, and it can be prioritized. So we're past 40% women in our top leadership now, and heading firmly towards the 50, which is of course where we should be, and that becomes then a driver for other elements of diversity. So we're fully aware that that's just one aspect, but it's also a very important one that kind of tends to have a halo effect on other aspects of diversity. So it's not the full program, but a main component.
Absolutely. Sophia, how do you think about that question? And you're a woman driving change in this sector, and what are some of the characteristics of leadership in this space? And recognizing that there are so many leaders here at Davos, so many in this room, like how are you thinking about how to drive and support those leaders going forward so that they can make these commitments and utilize the resources to really drive better outcomes in business?
So I've been in the game a minute. I've been in corporate sustainability 22 years of minutes. And I remember being at a financial conference on Wall Street, literal Wall Street at one of the major banks for sustainability. And there was a coffee break, and the line for the ladies' room was out the door and around the corner. And there was 0 men going in and out of the men's room. And I was like, we have a problem. Right? If sustainability is going to be gendered, we are not going to get anywhere. And one of the best things that's happened to sustainability is the sort of rise of the financial construct. ESG has pros and cons, but it definitely brought a more diverse leadership base into the dialogue, and that has stayed for the benefit of the topic, because it's also brought in different experiences, different walks of life, different skill sets. And I know I'm supposed to answer the question through the women's lens, but I first do genuinely feel obligated to answer it through the sustainability lens, which is we will only be taken seriously when we have all those backgrounds and all those leaders there. And then for the many beautiful young women in the audience thinking about corporate sustainability as a category, you have to go in nail hard, maybe diamond hard, right? Like, you have to lead with data. And any time I hear someone leading with values in their personal career conversation, I'm touched by it, and I redirect them because I want to see them get past middle management.
Very well put. Thank you. We're about at the end of our time, but just to close out and picking up on what you just said, you know, if you are a leader either in this room or listening to the cast of this or the recording, what is one of the most compelling arguments you can make and advocates can make to others in the C-suite, to others that this is the path forward for improving outcomes, improving returns? What should they be focusing on? Why should this matter?
You know, I think if we look at the average person working at our company or the average person looking for jobs with us, they keep scoring sustainability or environment or whatever way we phrase it higher and higher. It's a fact, it's data-based. So we know that the better we do that, the more of an attractive workplace we are. So that alone, forget the rest of the world, forget everything else, that alone makes this a brilliant case. And then on top of that, we got investors, we got stakeholders of many sorts, we got media that are interested in talking to us and profiling us, etc. That makes it just an even better business case. But then on top of that, we got to do it anyway. But look at the workplace. I think that's that is data right there for you.
Personally, obviously, the people involved and all that, but you asked what we should say to business leaders. So apparently we're going to put the people aside for a couple of years. Jokes. $100 billion in insurable damage this year from extreme climate events. $100 billion. That risk has to go somewhere. And it first is going to your insurance premiums, and then it is going to your P&L. If you are talking to a business leader who is not clicking into this larger picture so eloquently described already, focus on that. When risk is uninsurable, it does not go away. It gets passed on.
Powerful messages from you both. Thank you so much. Sophia Mendelsohn, TWOMEY-MADSEN, thank you for being here and for your work on this issue.